5 years after my son supposedly died in a house fire, I took my 11-year-old grandson on his first trip to the Pacific Ocean. His mother had disappeared long ago, leaving the boy in my care with nothing but heartbreak. 20 minutes after takeoff, he suddenly grabbed my sleeve so hard it hurt and whispered, "Grandpa, is that my dad?" But the woman sitting beside him isn't my mom. I looked up and my blood ran cold. What happened next made my face turn pale. If you found your way here today, I'm grateful, truly. Tell me in the comments what city or country are you watching from. I read every single one. This story weaves fictional elements into its narrative for storytelling purposes. Names and locations are not intended to represent anyone real, but the truth at the heart of it. That part belongs to all of us. The coffee maker sputtered and hissed the way it always did at 5 in the morning, filling the kitchen with the smell of dark roast and something close to routine. I sat at the table with both hands wrapped around my mug, letting the heat work its way into my knuckles, the kind of ache that shows up when you turn 60 and decides to stay forever. Outside, the Denver sky was still the deep purple of early summer, that narrow strip of time before the sun commits to rising and the whole world holds its breath. I had been sitting there for 40 minutes, staring at the 2 airline tickets I had printed the night before. Denver to Los Angeles. Departure 7:45 a.m. 2 passengers. One way to look at it was a birthday trip. Another way to look at it was every dollar I had managed to scrape together over the past 8 months tucked into 2 pieces of paper, sitting on a kitchen table next to a half-empty sugar bowl. I picked up the tickets and ran my thumb along the edge. Row 14 seats C and D, window and aisle. I already knew Leo would want the window. That kid had never seen the Pacific Ocean, and the way he talked about it, the way his whole face changed when he described waves he had only ever seen in movies, I figured a window seat was the least I could do. He was 11 years old today. 11 years old, and the best I could give him was a week in Los Angeles on a budget that required me to pack sandwiches for the flight. I pushed up from the chair and moved to the stove. Pancakes. That had been David's favorite on Sunday mornings, back when Sunday mornings were still something that happened in this house. I had not made them in years, but I remembered the recipe without thinking. 2 cups of flour, a tablespoon of baking powder, pinch of salt, enough milk to make the batter run slow off the spoon. My hands moved through it the way hands do when a thing has been done so many times, it stops requiring thought. The photograph on the mantel in the living room caught my eye the way it always did. David at 32, laughing at something off camera, his arm thrown around Samantha's shoulder, at some office party I barely remembered attending. I had kept it there because Leo looked at it every single day. He would stand in front of that photograph for a minute or two before school, studying his father's face the way a person studies a map of a place they have never been, but plan to visit someday. I turned back to the stove before the ache in my chest could settle into something heavier. The sound of feet hitting the floor upstairs came at exactly 6:45. Then the familiar thunder of an 11-year-old who had absolutely no concept of indoor volume. Leo appeared in the kitchen doorway, with his hair standing in 4 different directions and his Denver Broncos t-shirt on inside out. His eyes went straight to the stove, then to the table, then to the 2 printed tickets sitting next to the sugar bowl. His mouth fell open. "Grandpa," his voice came out as barely a breath. "Are those airplane tickets?" I said. "Los Angeles. We leave in about an hour, so I'd strongly recommend putting your shirt on the right way before we head out." Leo looked down at his shirt, looked back up at me, and then let out a sound that I can only describe as what happens when pure joy has nowhere else to go. He crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and wrapped both arms around my waist so hard I had to grab the counter to keep my balance. His face pressed into my ribs, and I could feel him shaking, not from crying, but from the kind of happiness that is almost too big for a body to hold. The beach, he said into my shirt. Grandpa, we're going to the beach. That's generally what happens when you fly to Los Angeles, yes. He pulled back and looked up at me with those dark eyes, David's eyes, the same shape, the same way of going serious when something mattered. How long have you been planning this? Long enough to know you're going to want the window seat. His grin could have lit up the whole block. You know me so well. I set a plate of pancakes in front of him and watched him eat with the kind of focused enthusiasm that only belongs to children and people who have not had a decent meal in days. He talked between bites about Santa Monica Pier, about whether dolphins were actually friendly, or whether that was just something people said, about whether the Pacific Ocean smelled different from the Atlantic, which he had also never seen but felt qualified to compare. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee when the back door opened, and Carol Whitman leaned over the fence that separated our yards the way she had done every morning for the past 12 years. Robert Harris, she called out, her voice carrying the warm authority of a woman who had spent 30 years as a school nurse and never entirely retired from the role. Is that boy finally getting a vacation? Heading to Los Angeles in an hour? I called back. Carol pressed one hand to her chest like I had said something that genuinely moved her. She was 58, with silver-streaked hair she kept in a braid, and a laugh that you could hear from 2 houses over. She had brought casseroles after David's funeral. She had driven Leo to his soccer games on the 3 Saturdays I had spent in the hospital with a kidney stone that had no business being the size it was. She had never once made me feel like accepting help was something to be ashamed of. Leo, sweetheart, she called out. You have the best grandfather in the state of Colorado. You know that. Leo looked up from his pancakes with syrup on his chin. I know that, he said completely seriously. Carol laughed and disappeared back into her yard, and I felt something tighten in my throat that I was not going to examine too closely at 6:50 in the morning. We loaded the car 20 minutes later. Leo dragged his rolling suitcase down the front steps with the focused determination of someone embarking on a serious expedition. I locked the front door, turned around, and found myself looking at the house the way you look at something, when you have a feeling, not a bad feeling, not exactly, but the particular kind of unease that my body had learned to recognize over 30 years of walking into buildings that were on fire. Something about the morning felt like a threshold. I told myself I was being dramatic. I told myself it was just a birthday trip, pancakes and airplane tickets and a kid who had never seen the ocean. I told myself that the tightness in my chest was nothing more than the altitude and the early hour. I picked up my bag, walked to the car, and started the engine. Grandpa, Leo said from the back seat, buckling his seatbelt with a click. This is going to be the best birthday I've ever had. I can feel it. I looked at him in the rearview mirror, this boy I had been raising for 5 years, this 11-year-old, who still slept with a nightlight and could recite every statistic from the last 3 NFL seasons, and asked questions about his father in the quiet way of someone who had learned that some questions hurt the people they love. Yeah, I said. I think you might be right. I pulled out of the driveway and did not look back at the photograph on the mantel or the empty chair at the kitchen table or the name I had not let myself say out loud in years. I had buried you, David. I was certain of that. I had stood over an empty urn and told your son you were never coming back. I just had no idea how wrong I was. The taxi smelled like pine air freshener and old leather, and the driver had a country radio station playing low enough that you could hear it, but not quite make out the words. Leo had his backpack on his lap, even though there was plenty of room on the seat beside him. He held onto the straps with both hands, like the bag might try to escape if he loosened his grip, and he watched Denver scroll past the window with the expression of someone committing a place to memory before leaving it behind. I watched him in the reflection of the glass. He had grown so much in the past year that I still caught myself surprised sometimes. The way his shoulders had filled out, the way his voice had started to crack at the edges when he got excited about something. He was not the 6-year-old I had carried up the front steps 5 years ago, the one who had fallen asleep in my arms before I even got the door unlocked. He was becoming someone. I just hoped I had done enough of the right things to help him get there. The radio shifted to something slower, and the driver, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s, with a University of Colorado bumper sticker on his dashboard, and the easy manner of someone who had driven this route 10,000 times, glanced at us in the rearview mirror. "You two heading somewhere fun?" he asked. "Los Angeles," Leo said before I could open my mouth. "It's my birthday. I'm 11 today," the driver grinned. 11 years old and flying to LA. That beats my 11th birthday by about 1,000 miles. I got a bicycle and a rain poncho. Leo laughed, that bright, unguarded laugh that he only let out when he was truly comfortable. "Did you at least like the bicycle?" "Hated it," the driver said cheerfully. "Fell off it the first day and chipped my front tooth. But I kept the poncho. You never know when Denver's going to turn on you." Leo laughed again and turned back to the window, and for a few minutes the cab was easy and warm in the way that early mornings sometimes are when the rest of the world has not woken up yet to complicate things. Then the driver said, "Going with the whole family." The question landed softly, the way innocent questions do before you realize they are not innocent at all. I felt Leo go still beside me, just a small shift, a slight tightening of his hands around the backpack straps. The kind of stillness that a child learns when a word brushes up against something sore. "Just the two of us," I said. "Grandfather and grandson." "Well," the driver said, nodding like that settled it. "That's a good combination." He went back to watching the road, and the country music filled the space he left behind. I looked over at Leo. He was still watching Denver through the glass, but the brightness had dimmed a little around the edges, the way a room changes when someone walks out and leaves a door open to the cold. "Grandpa," he said quietly, "does Mom know it's my birthday today?" The question hit me square in the chest. I had been waiting for it. I had known it was coming the same way you know a storm is coming. Not because you can see it yet, but because something in the air changes and your body starts preparing before your mind catches up. Samantha had been gone for 5 years. Leo had been 6 years old when she left, old enough to remember her face, but young enough that the memory had softened at the edges into something more feeling than image. I had told him the version I believed, that his mother had gone through something difficult, that she had made choices I did not fully understand, that sometimes adults broke in ways that were not about the children they left behind. I had never told him she was a bad person. I had never let myself say that, even on the nights when the anger sat so heavy in my chest I could barely breathe around it. "I think about that a lot," I said carefully. "And honestly, Leo, I believe she does." He turned to look at me, and his eyes were doing that thing they did sometimes, that searching, measuring look that was entirely too old for an 11-year-old face. "You think she's okay?" "I think she's out there somewhere," I said. "And I think she carries you with her, even when you can't see it." He held my gaze for the long moment, deciding whether to accept that or push further. Then he gave a small, slow nod and turned back to the window. "I just wonder sometimes," he said, more to the glass than to me. "That's all." "That's fair," I said. "Wondering is fair." He was quiet for a minute. Not the closed-off kind of quiet, but the kind that means something is being processed rather than shut away. Then he said, "Do you think she'd be surprised that we're going to LA?" Something squeezed hard behind my sternum. "I think she'd be glad," I said. I think she'd be really glad you're going somewhere good." Leo considered that. Then a small smile found its way back onto his face, tentative at first, then steadier. "I'm going to see the Pacific Ocean," he said, like he was reminding himself that the good thing was still real. "I've never seen the Pacific Ocean." "Nobody from Denver has," the driver offered from the front seat. "That's the whole point of leaving." Leo grinned at that, and some of the weight lifted from the cab, and I let out a breath I had been holding since the question about Samantha. At the airport, the departures terminal was already buzzing with the particular organized chaos of early morning travel, rolling suitcases and paper coffee cups, and the mechanical drone of the PA system, announcing gates and delays. Leo gripped his rolling bag handle and walked beside me with the focused energy of someone who had never done this before and was determined to do it correctly. We found our gate with 20 minutes to spare. Leo dropped into one of the plastic chairs and immediately pressed his face against the window that overlooked the tarmac, watching the ground crews move around the planes with the reverence of a kid, watching something he had only ever seen in movies. "Grandpa," he said, his breath fogging the glass slightly. "What if I don't like flying?" "You will," I said. "But what if I don't?" "Then you'll get through it anyway," I said. "That's what Harris men do." He pulled back from the window and looked at me with an expression that was trying to be skeptical but kept sliding toward a grin. "Is that actually a thing?" "It is now," I said. He laughed and the grin won, and he turned back to the window. I settled into the seat beside him and stretched my bad knee out in front of me and watched the planes roll slowly across the tarmac in the early morning light. Then Leo said, without turning around, "Grandpa, no matter what happens today, I just want you to know that you're my family. The whole thing. Not just part of it." My throat closed so fast, I could not have answered even if I had known what to say. I reached over and put my hand on top of his, where it rested on the armrest, and I pressed down gently, and he pressed back, and we sat like that until they called our boarding group. I did not know then what was waiting for us on the other side of that gate. I would give almost anything now to have stayed in that moment just a little longer. The plane lifted off the runway at 7:52, and Leo grabbed my arm with both hands the moment the wheels left the ground, not from fear exactly, but from the kind of overwhelming aliveness that hits you when something enormous is finally happening after you have waited for it so long. He let out a sound halfway between a gasp and a laugh, pressed his face against the oval window, and watched Denver fall away beneath us, like a map someone was slowly rolling up and putting away. "Grandpa," he breathed. "Grandpa, we're actually doing it." "We are actually doing it," I confirmed. "The houses look like Legos." "They do. And the highway looks like a zipper." "I suppose it does." He turned to me with his eyes enormous and his cheeks flushed pink and said with complete sincerity, "This is the greatest thing that has ever happened to me." I laughed, genuinely laughed, the kind that comes up from somewhere deep and catches you off guard. "You haven't even seen the ocean yet." "I know," he said, "and if this is what it feels like before the ocean, I'm going to absolutely lose my mind when I see the actual ocean." He turned back to the window, and I settled into my seat and tried to unknot the tension that had been living in my shoulders since approximately 5 o'clock that morning. The plane leveled out above the clouds, and the cabin filled with the familiar sounds of a full flight finding its rhythm. The rustle of headphones being untangled, the thud of tray tables coming down the soft mechanical breathing of the air vents overhead. I had never liked flying. 30 years of walking into buildings that were actively trying to kill me, and somehow it was air travel that made my palms sweat. There was something about the helplessness of it, the surrendering of control to a machine, and two strangers in a cockpit that my body refused to make peace with, no matter how many times I did it. I closed my eyes and focused on the sound of Leo narrating the cloud formations to himself in a low, satisfied murmur. I must have drifted because the next thing I registered was Leo's hand closing around my forearm like a vice. "Grandpa." His voice was different. The brightness had drained out of it completely, replaced by something tight and careful, like a person trying to speak through a throat that had suddenly gone very small. "Grandpa, look." I kept my eyes closed. "What is it?" "Look." He shook my arm. "Up there, a few rows ahead, on the left side." I opened my eyes, blinking against the recycled cabin light. "Leo, it's probably just—" "Please, just look." Something in the way he said "please" made me sit up straight. I looked. 2 rows ahead, and across the aisle, a man sat turned slightly sideways in his seat, leaning toward the woman beside him, in the easy way of someone deep in a private conversation. He wore a wide-brimmed hat that threw most of his face into shadow, and a pair of dark sunglasses that would have looked out of place inside the cabin if everything else about him had not suggested that he was the kind of man who did exactly as he pleased without consulting anyone else's opinion. He was broad through the shoulders in a way that was familiar, and his hands moved when he talked not wildly, but with that particular economy of gesture that belongs to people who have learned to make a point with minimum effort. The woman beside him had dark hair pulled back sharply, and she listened to him with the focused attention of someone taking a meeting rather than sharing a flight. "It's just someone who—" I started. "Listen," Leo said. And then the man laughed. It was not a loud laugh. It was the kind that escapes before a person means to let it out low and quick with a slight catch at the end, like the sound got surprised by itself on the way out. I had heard that laugh at birthday dinners and backyard barbecues and late-night phone calls that ran longer than they should have. I had heard it in hospital waiting rooms and in the front seat of a truck driving home from a football game in the rain. I had heard that laugh for 32 years. My hand gripped the armrest. "That's Dad," Leo said. He was not asking. His voice had gone very quiet and very certain, the way voices go when a person has just stepped onto ground they were not sure would hold them. "Grandpa, that's my dad's laugh. I know that laugh. I've listened to the videos Mom used to record on her phone. I know exactly what he sounds like." "Leo." My voice came out steadier than I felt. "People can sound alike. It's a common—" and look at his face. Leo leaned forward slightly, straining against his seatbelt. His jaw, the way his jaw sits, it looks exactly like the photo on the mantel. I look at that photo every single morning, and that is the same jaw. My chest had gone cold in a way that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I made myself look again. Carefully this time. The man shifted in his seat, adjusting his weight, and for just a moment, the angle of the cabin light caught the side of his face below the hat brim, the line of his jaw, the slope of his shoulder, the way his right hand lifted and tapped twice on the armrest when he was making a point. David had done that his whole life. Tap, tap. Like punctuation. "It's a coincidence," I said. The words felt like something I was manufacturing rather than something I believed. "It has to be a coincidence. David is gone, Leo. We know that. We were at the service. We were at a service for an empty urn," Leo said, and the directness of it, the clear-eyed, unvarnished truth of what he had just said, hit me like a hand to the chest. He was 11 years old, and he had just articulated the thing I had never let myself think too clearly, that there had been no body, no proof, nothing but a report and a piece of paper, and the word of people I had never thought to question. The woman beside the man, the one with the dark hair, turned her head slightly, and for just a moment her eyes swept back along the cabin, in a routine automatic scan. They passed over me without interest and moved on. But my heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my back teeth. "Grandpa." Leo's voice dropped even lower. He turned to look at me, and his eyes were wide and bright with something that was not quite hope and not quite fear, but lived exactly in the terrible space between them. He looked back at me, just a second ago when you had your eyes closed. He looked back down the aisle, and he looked right at me, and Leo stopped, swallowed. He smiled, Grandpa. He smiled like he knew who I was. The plane droned on through 30,000 feet of open sky. I stared straight ahead at the seat back in front of me, and I made my breathing slow and even, and I told myself every rational thing I knew how to tell myself. People resembled other people. Grief played tricks. A 60-year-old man with bad knees and an 11-year-old grandson was on his way to Los Angeles for a birthday week. And that was all this was, and that was all this needed to be. But my hands would not stop shaking. And somewhere in the seat, 2 rows ahead of us, the man with the wide-brimmed hat and the familiar laugh had gone very still. We did not speak about it again on the plane. Leo turned back to his window and watched the landscape change from Colorado brown to Nevada pale to the wide, sun-hammered sprawl of Southern California. I sat beside him with my hands flat on my thighs and my jaw tight, and my mind doing the thing it had trained itself not to do for 5 years. The man had gone to the back of the plane before we landed. I did not see his face. Los Angeles hit us with a wall of warm air exhaust and ocean salt, and something sweet underneath that you can never quite name. Leo stepped out of the terminal, stopped dead on the sidewalk, and tipped his head back to look at the palm trees. "They're real," he said. "Most things are," I said, picking up his bag before someone tripped over it. The hotel was on Ocean Avenue, 4 blocks from the beach. Clean, well-kept, 2 queen beds, a small balcony with a sliver of blue water visible between 2 buildings. When Leo saw it, he made a sound like someone had knocked the air out of him. "I can literally see the ocean from our room," he said, gripping the railing. That was the general idea. "Can we go right now?" "Tomorrow," I said. "We eat, we sleep, we go tomorrow." He groaned with full-body commitment. But he went. We ate sandwiches on the balcony as the sun dropped and turned the sky the color of a bruised peach. Leo talked. I answered when he asked me things directly. Most of my attention was somewhere I could not name yet. We went to bed at 9. Leo was asleep within 6 minutes, that total, complete surrender that belongs only to children who have used up everything they had. I lay on my back in the dark and stared at the ceiling and counted the sounds of the building around me. I was somewhere on the edge of sleep when I heard the voices. They came through the wall to my left. Not loud. The controlled kind, the kind that happens between 2 people practiced at containing damage who have learned to keep their voices level, even when what is happening between them is not. A man's voice. Low. Clipped. "I told you to handle it before we landed. You had one job, Victoria." I stopped breathing. Not because of the words. Because of the way he said the word, one pulled tighter, like a wire being twisted, not louder, but harder, in a way that had nothing to do with volume. I had heard that exact emphasis at kitchen tables and in parking lots and in the front hallway of a house in Denver that had burned to the ground 5 years ago. I sat up. "Fragments came through the account, needs to be clean by Thursday." "You think I flew back from Denver for this?" The woman Victoria answered in the voice of a colleague, choosing her battles, not a girlfriend having an argument. I walked to the wall and pressed my palm flat against it. My heart was slamming hard enough that I was genuinely concerned Leo might hear it from across the room. The voices stilled. A door opened and closed. I stood there a long time after that, holding on to the dresser, breathing. "Grandpa," Leo's voice came thick with sleep. "What are you doing?" "Nothing," I said. "Getting some water. Go back to sleep." He dropped back onto his pillow. 90 seconds later, he was breathing deeply. I walked to the window and looked out at the dark strip of ocean between the buildings, moving slow, indifferent. I had spent 5 years telling myself David was gone, that the river in Idaho had taken him, and that was the end. Standing at that window, I felt the alternative begin to build itself in the dark, and I was terrified of how solid it was starting to look. I did not sleep. I moved to the chair by the window at 2 in the morning and sat there with my arms crossed over my chest and watched the darkness outside shift through its slow gradations toward gray. At some point, a garbage truck groaned its way down the street below, and the sound of it was almost a relief, something entirely ordinary, belonging to a world where dead men stayed dead, and hotel walls did not rearrange everything you thought you knew. By 5:30, I had made up my mind about exactly nothing. Leo woke at 6:48 with the same explosive energy he brought to every morning, swinging his legs over the side of the bed and announcing that he was hungry, that he could smell the ocean from his pillow, and that if we did not go to the beach within 30 minutes, he was going to consider the entire vacation a failure. "You slept 4 hours, and you're ready to classify the vacation," I said. "I slept 8 hours and I feel incredible." He looked at the chair by the window, then at me, then back at the chair. "You slept in the chair." I rested in the chair. "Grandpa, there's a difference between sleeping and resting, and neither of them is the chair." "Go brush your teeth," I said. "We'll get breakfast first." He pointed at me with the focused authority of someone making a legal argument. "That is not a denial." But he went. We found a diner 2 blocks from the hotel, the kind that had been on the same corner since 1974, and had not updated the menu since approximately 1987. In my experience, that means the food is either very good or very terrible with nothing in between. Ours was very good. Leo had a short stack with strawberries and orange juice the size of his head, and talked the entire time about his sandcastle plans, a construction project of such structural ambition that I suggested he might need a permit. "Can you actually get a permit for a sandcastle?" he asked. "In California," I said, "you can get a permit for almost anything, and you're required to get one for everything else." He laughed so hard he nearly knocked over his juice. By 9:30, we were on the beach, Santa Monica. In the morning had a quality of light I had not expected, not the hard, flat brightness of midday, but something softer coming in low off the water, making everything it touched look slightly more significant than it was. The sand was cool underfoot. Leo timed the waves with his watch and reported that they came every 12 seconds exactly, and when I told him the ocean did not run on a schedule, he said this one did, and he could prove it with 6 data points. Then he dropped his bag and ran straight into the water at a dead sprint. He came out the other side, gasping and laughing, t-shirt plastered to his chest, hair streaming. "It's cold," he shouted. "It's the Pacific in June," I called back. "It's always cold. Why didn't anyone tell me? I just did." He plunged back in anyway. I sat in the beach chair and watched him and tried to let the ocean do what people say it does. The cleaning out effect, the way it takes things from you if you sit long enough. I had never entirely believed that. This morning I was willing to try. I had been sitting there 20 minutes when I saw him, 40 yards down the beach, walking slowly at the waterline, where the sand was dark and firm. Swim trunks and a loose linen shirt open at the collar, hands loose at his sides. He walked the way a man walks when he is thinking about something that has nothing to do with where his feet are going. I stopped watching Leo. The width of those shoulders was familiar from 40 yards. The way he paused, weight back on his left foot, right hand, lifting to shade his eyes, was familiar. I had seen that posture at football games and Sunday dinners and in the driveway of a house in Denver at 7 in the morning. I gripped the arms of the beach chair. The man turned slightly, quartering away, and I saw the back of his neck. Below the hairline left of center, a small dark mark, a tattoo size of a quarter. David had gotten that tattoo at 25 on a trip to Austin with friends from his firm. He had called me from the parlor, slightly drunk and very pleased with himself, to say he had just gotten a compass rose because a man should always know which way is north. I had told him a compass rose did not actually tell you which way was north, it just indicated that directions existed. He had laughed that laugh. That laugh. I was halfway out of my chair before I realized I was moving. Then I stopped. Leo was 30 feet away in the water, my knees were 60 years old, and the beach sand was the worst possible surface for what I was about to do. The man turned and walked away in the opposite direction, head down, growing smaller. Leo came splashing out, dripping and grinning. "Did you see that wave? It literally picked me up and put me down 3 feet sideways." He grabbed his towel, wrapped it around his shoulders, dropped into the sand beside me. Then he followed my gaze down the beach. The man was just a shape now, almost gone into the crowd. "Grandpa," Leo said slowly, "is that—" "I don't know," I said. The most honest thing I had said since we landed. Leo stared at the distant shape, his jaw set, in a way that was so much like David's jaw that my chest ached with it. Then he turned to me, voice very careful and very quiet. "You see it too," he said. "I can tell you see it too." I reached over and put my hand on the back of his neck the way I had done since he was small, the way that meant I hear you, and I'm here, and I don't have an answer, but I'm not going anywhere. "Build your sandcastle," I said. "Stay where I can see you." He held my gaze a beat, deciding something. Then he nodded, picked up his shovel, and walked down to the waterline. I watched the distant figure until it disappeared completely into the crowd. My hands were shaking. They had not stopped since somewhere over Nevada. The afternoon came in hot and bright, the way Southern California afternoons do in June. The kind of heat that does not announce itself, but simply arrives and makes itself at home. Leo had abandoned the sandcastle project after completing what he called Phase 1, a foundation wall and 2 corner towers that he deemed structurally sound, and had moved back into the water where he had spent the better part of an hour, jumping waves with the methodical dedication of someone conducting important research. I had moved my chair closer to the waterline. Not because I was worried exactly. Leo was a strong swimmer I had made sure of that 3 summers of lessons at the community pool on Alameda Avenue, because a man who spent 30 years thinking about worst-case scenarios does not raise a child without teaching them to survive water. But the morning had left something restless in me that I could not sit far from him and feel comfortable. The beach had filled up as the day warmed. Families with coolers and umbrellas, teenagers with speakers propped in the sand, a volleyball net that had materialized somewhere around noon, with a rotating cast of players who seemed to know each other and also seemed to know everyone else. The ordinary machinery of a summer afternoon on a California beach moving along without reference to the private emergency that had taken up residence in my chest. I was watching Leo negotiate with a particularly aggressive wave when I heard the woman scream. It was not the scream of someone who was startled or who had seen something unpleasant. It was the scream of someone watching something go wrong, in a way that could not be taken back, high and cracking, and going up at the end, in a way that cut straight through the noise of the beach and hit every person within earshot in the same place. I was on my feet before the sound finished. 30 yards to my left, a woman was standing knee-deep in the water, with both hands pressed against her mouth, staring at something just below the surface. A man was face down in the shallows, his body moving wrong, not the way a swimmer moves, not the way a person moves voluntarily at all, but the limp, unresisting way of someone who had stopped making decisions about where their body went. I ran. 30 years of muscle memory does not care about bad knees or 60-year-old lungs, or the fact that beach sand is the worst possible surface for a man my age to run across at speed. It simply takes over the way it was trained to, and the rest of you comes along whether it wants to or not. I hit the water at a stride and went down to my knees beside the man and got my hands under his shoulders and pulled him up and over onto his back in one motion. His face was slack, lips slightly blue at the corners, chest not moving in any purposeful way. The woman was still screaming behind me a name. I realized she was screaming a name, but the sound was breaking apart, and I could not hold on to the syllables. I pressed 2 fingers to his neck. Pulse present. Faint but present. Call 911, I said to the woman, loud and flat and clear, the voice I had used in burning buildings when there was no time for anything but the essential information. Tell them heat stroke, possible cardiac event, Santa Monica Beach, north of the pier. Go. She stopped screaming. People respond to certainty even when they are terrified, especially when they are terrified. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands and moved back toward the dry sand. I tilted the man's head back, cleared his airway with 2 fingers, checked again. Breathing, but shallow. I positioned my hands over his sternum and began compressions, counting under my breath, the way I had counted 10,000 times in 30 years of training and deployment. The beach had contracted around me. I could feel people gathering at my back, the particular change in air pressure that a crowd creates, but I had learned a long time ago to put crowds outside the boundary of my attention when there was work to do. I pushed the wet hair back from his face to check his color, and I stopped. Not long, not more than a second. A single beat of suspended time, the kind that happens when the world presents you with something your mind has been insisting for 5 years could not exist, and the gap between what you believed and what you are currently looking at has to be crossed somehow. There was a scar under his left ear, small, silver pale against his tanned skin, the size of a thumbnail with the particular puckered quality of a scar that had been made by something jagged rather than something sharp, the edge of a bicycle handlebar, to be specific, on a Sunday afternoon in August, when David was 8 years old and had been going too fast down the hill at the end of our street and had overcorrected and gone over the handlebars and come up screaming with blood running down his neck. I had pressed a dish towel against that wound for 40 minutes while we waited for the emergency room to call us back. I had kissed that scar the day before his wedding because Samantha had laughed about it at the rehearsal dinner, and David had turned red, and I had thought it was the funniest and most human thing I had seen in years. I knew that scar the way I knew my own hands. I resumed compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4. Keep counting. Keep working. Do not stop for anything, because the moment you stop is the moment the situation gets ahead of you, and a situation that gets ahead of you is a situation that ends badly. 30 years. 1, 2, 3, 4. The man coughed. It came up from somewhere deep, a wet, convulsive sound that shook his whole chest and brought water with it. His body curled slightly with the effort, and I turned him onto his side and kept my hand on his back and let him work through it. His color began to change. The blue left his lips. His chest started moving with more intention. His eyes opened. They were unfocused at first, moving, without landing anywhere, the way eyes move when a person is coming back from somewhere far away and has not yet identified where they have returned to. Then they steadied. Then they found my face, and every muscle in his body went rigid, not with surprise, not with confusion. With the specific and unmistakable rigidity of someone who has just seen exactly what they feared most and cannot decide in the next 2 seconds whether to run or to stay. "Dad." His voice came out as barely a breath, wrecked and raw and stripped of everything except the single word. "Dad." The woman was back. She knelt beside me, her hands reaching for the man, her face a complicated wreckage of relief and something else I did not have time to identify. A hotel staff member was jogging across the sand with a first aid kit. Somewhere further back I could hear Leo's voice calling for me, high and urgent. I stood up, my legs held. I was grateful for that. I took 2 steps back and let the staff member move in, and I turned around, because I needed a moment, just one moment, where no one could see my face, because what was on my face right now was not something I was ready to share with anyone. Leo hit me at a dead run, both arms going around my waist, his wet hair pressed against my shirt. "Grandpa, are you okay? I saw you run. I didn't know what happened. Is that man okay?" I wrapped both arms around him and held on. "He's going to be fine," I said into the top of his head. "Everybody's going to be fine." Leo pulled back and looked up at me, and I watched his eyes go to the man on the sand behind me, and I watched his face do in real time what my face had done 2 minutes ago, that same crossing from recognition to disbelief, to a place beyond both of them that did not have a name. "Grandpa," he whispered. His voice had gone the way voices go when the body is not sure it has enough air to support full speech. "That's him. That's the man from the plane. That's—" "I know," I said. The 2 words came out quieter than I intended, flattened by everything behind them. Leo stared at me and I stared back, and between us was 5 years of grief and an empty urn on a shelf in Denver, and a scar under a left ear that I had kissed at a rehearsal dinner, and everything, absolutely everything that those facts meant when you put them together in the same sentence. "What do we do?" Leo asked. It was the right question. It was the only question. And I did not have an answer yet. "Right now," I said, "we go back to the hotel, and we let me think." I took his hand, and we walked up the beach, and I did not look back. But I felt it the whole way, the weight of eyes on my back, familiar and impossible, watching us go. The room felt like it had shrunk. Leo dropped onto his bed and stared at me with eyes that were doing too much work for an 11-year-old, and I pulled the chair from the desk and sat down and faced him and waited. Outside the window, Santa Monica was doing what it always did in the early evening, the light going gold and long across the water, the beach emptying out the ordinary machinery of a summer vacation afternoon winding itself down. None of it had anything to do with us anymore. "You knew," Leo said. "Before today. You already knew something was wrong." "I suspected," I said. "Since when? When the first night, through the wall." I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, hands loose. I heard his voice, the way he emphasized certain words when he was angry. I've heard that my entire life. Leo's jaw went tight, and his hands curled into fists on his thighs, and he breathed out hard through his nose, the breath of someone who wants to throw something and has decided against it. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wasn't certain," I said. "And because you were 6 years old when he left, and telling you your dead father might be alive in the next hotel room is not something you do on a guess at midnight." He looked at the floor. He was working through it. I could see the sequence of it moving across his face, the logic and the anger, and the place where he decided which one to lead with. "Okay," he said finally. "That's fair." He looked up. "I'm still mad." "That's also fair." "So what do we do? Do we call the police?" "Not yet," I said. His head came up fast. "Why not?" Because David has been living under a false identity for 5 years. The moment I make that call, he knows within the hour. And a man with his resources doesn't wait around to answer questions, he disappears. And if he disappears again, we lose him completely. Leo stared at me. You've thought about this? I've been thinking about it since 2 this morning, I said. I had time. He was quiet for a beat. Then very quietly, is he dangerous? The question landed hard and stayed there. I thought about the beach, every muscle in David's body going rigid when he saw my face. The voice through the wall, clipped and cold, talking about accounts that needed to be cleaned by Thursday. The Patek Philippe on his wrist worth more than most people's houses. I don't know yet, I said, which is exactly why we move carefully. Leo looked at me for a long moment with those dark, serious eyes. Then he said, You're scared. Yes, I said, I am. Something shifted in his face. Not relief, something quieter than that. The specific thing that happens when a child realizes the adult they depend on is telling them the complete truth. Okay, he said. I trust you. 3 words, flat and certain and not up for discussion. My throat closed so fast it actually hurt. Get cleaned up, I said when I could. We'll order food in, and Leo, don't say a word to anyone. Front desk, other guests, nobody. Can you do that? Yes, he said. No hesitation. He went into the bathroom and closed the door, and I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at Frank Odell's name on my phone and thought about what I was about to ask him to do. Then the phone buzzed. Unknown number. 3 lines. We need to talk. Tonight. Hotel bar. 9 p.m. Don't bring the boy. I read it twice. Then I set the phone down and pressed both palms flat on my thighs and breathed in through the nose, out through the mouth, the way I had learned to breathe in the seconds before walking through a door, with fire on the other side. All right, David. Let's see what you've built. Before I tell you what Robert discovered at that bar, what he saw on David's wrist, that changed everything, I need to know you're still with me. If you've made it this far, drop fire in the comments right now. That one word tells me you're here, and it means more than you know. A small note. This story contains fictional elements woven in for storytelling purposes. Names, places, and certain details may not reflect any specific situation. If that's not the kind of content you're looking for, no hard feelings at all, you're welcome to step away. But if you're staying, what comes next will change everything you thought you knew. I left Leo with the deadbolt thrown and strict instructions. If I was not back by 11, he called the front desk and asked them to call the police. He gave me the front desk number from memory before I finished the sentence. I looked at him for a moment, this boy who had learned to be ready for things, and felt the particular mixture of pride and grief that came with knowing exactly why. The bar was amber lit, and quiet jazz moving through the speakers at a volume designed to soften edges. I arrived 10 minutes early. Old habit, 30 years of walking into unknown situations, had hardwired a simple principle: be in position before the door opens. I chose the corner table back against the wall, clear line of sight to both exits, and ordered a club soda. David walked in at exactly 9 o'clock. He had changed since the beach. Dark slacks, collared shirt sleeves rolled, no hat, no sunglasses, nothing between his face and the room. He was older than the photograph on my mantel, and younger than the ghost I had been carrying for 5 years. Gray at the temples, lines around his eyes. The unhurried confidence of a man who had learned to occupy rooms like this one and had been doing it for a long time. He sat down across from me. His jaw worked. His eyes went glassy. Then he leaned forward, pressed both hands over his face, and made a sound I had not heard from him since he was 9 years old and found our dog dead in the backyard on a Saturday morning. Dad. The word broke clean in half. Dad. I'm so sorry. He slid out of his chair and onto his knees on the floor of the hotel bar, gripping the table edge with both hands, his shoulders shaking hard. A woman at the next table glanced over and looked quickly away. Please. He reached across and took my hand, his grip desperate and strong, pressing my knuckles against his forehead. I had no choice. There were people the kind who don't accept apologies. They threatened you. They threatened Leo. I had to disappear. I had to make them believe I was gone. It was the only way to keep you both safe. I looked down at the top of his head. I had buried an empty urn for this man. I had sat in a church and listened to people eulogize him, and held his 6-year-old son while he cried for a year, asking where his father went. I had earned the right to believe him. Part of me, the part that had spent 5 years in the dark, that had never entirely stopped being his father, wanted to. But something was wrong. Not with the tears, which might have been real. Not with the shaking, which might have been real too. What was wrong was underneath all of it, in the gap between the performance and the person performing it. 30 years of reading fire scenes had given me a sensitivity to that gap. A fire that starts by accident looks different from one that was planned if you know what to look for. David was still gripping my hand, and when he pressed it against his forehead, the cuff of his shirt slid back. The watch caught the light. Patek Philippe reference 5726A. Annual calendar Nautilus. Blue dial, limited run of fewer than 500 pieces, released fall of 2024. Retail price in excess of $180,000. I had read about it in a trade newsletter 8 months ago and remembered it the way engineers remember things that represent a category of engineering precision. Excess a particular kind of statement about who a person believes themselves to be. It had been on his wrist the entire time. A man hiding from dangerous people does not wear a watch that costs more than most Americans make in 3 years. A man who faked his death to escape a threat does not spend 5 years building the kind of life that puts that watch on his wrist. A man in genuine danger does not book a suite at $800 a night. The story he was telling me was a costume. Underneath it was something I did not know the shape of yet. But I could feel the edges of it, the way you feel the walls of a room you are moving through in total darkness. He finished talking. I had caught pieces a few more days. I promise I can fix this. Just trust me one more time. And I had listened to all of it with my hand in his and my face arranged into the expression of a man who might be persuaded. I squeezed his hand once. Okay, son, I said. My voice was level. I had learned a long time ago how to make it do things my body was not doing. Give me a day or two, then we'll talk. He looked up. His eyes were red, and his face was open the way faces go open when they believe they have won something. Thank you, he said. Dad, thank you. He straightened his shirt and walked out with the careful walk of a man feeling too much and showing none of it. I sat there after he left, turning my club soda glass in my hands. The watch, the suite, the woman named Victoria who talked to him like a colleague, an account that needed to be cleaned by Thursday, a fire in Denver 5 years ago, and a report that said accident and an urn that went into the ground empty. Fire never lies about what started it, I thought. Not if you know how to read the evidence. I set down my glass. I had a phone call to make. Leo had fallen asleep, sitting up against the headboard, the remote balanced on his knee mouth, slightly open face, completely slack. The television was showing something about the Sonoran Desert. I turned it off, eased the remote away without waking him, and pulled the blanket up. I stood over him for a moment. 11 years old. He had spent this day identifying his dead father on a beach, listening to me explain why we could not call the police, and then sitting alone in a hotel room, waiting to find out what happened downstairs. He had handled all of it with a steadiness that made my chest hurt, in a way I did not have a word for. I sat down at the desk by the window and picked up the hotel notepad. I wrote at the top what I know. Then I made a list. The watch. Patek Philippe. Reference 5726. A limited run released fall 2024. Retail value approximately $180,000. A man running from dangerous people does not wear this. A man who faked his death to escape a threat does not spend 5 years building the kind of life that puts this on his wrist. The suit custom-made, built from scratch for his body, not altered off a rack. That takes money and time and a tailor who has your measurements on file. The room suite on the 6th floor, $800 minimum per night. David had checked in the day before we arrived, a 3-night booking. He had not chosen this hotel to hide. He had chosen it for a reason. Victoria, not a girlfriend. The dynamic through that wall was professional, clipped, divided the specific friction of two people who work together and are currently disagreeing about something operational. I stared at the list, then wrote one more line at the bottom. He came here for a reason, and the reason has something to do with Leo. The timing was not coincidence. Leo's birthday. Leo turning 11. A man who fakes his death and builds a new life does not end up in the room next door to his father and son by accident. I looked at the clock. 2:14 in the morning. I found Frank Odell in my contacts and pressed call. It rang twice. Robert. Frank's voice was alert, not the groggy alert of someone woken up, but the quiet alert of someone who had been waiting. Frank was 61, former Denver PD detective, moved into insurance investigation after a knee injury ended his field career. In 20 years of working cases together, I had never called him and found him unprepared. It's 2 in the morning your time. Talk to me. I need you to pull technical records from a fire, I said. Denver, 5 years ago. David Harris, Clearwater Drive. Ruled accidental faulty wiring. I need the actual investigation file. Engineering reports, origin and cause analysis, alarm system records. Everything. A pause. Waited, but brief. David Harris, he said. You're David Harris. Yes. Robert. His voice dropped. What's going on? I think the fire wasn't an accident, and I think the person who died in it wasn't David. Frank absorbed that the way he absorbed everything rapidly, without drama, rearranging it into categories. Where are you? Santa Monica. Here with Leo for his birthday. And David? Next door. Literally. Room on the other side of our wall. Frank let out a breath that lived in the territory between a word and an expletive. You've seen him. I pulled him out of the ocean yesterday afternoon. He called me Dad. 8 seconds of silence. Then, all right. I need 24 hours. Insurance files from a closed case can be accessed through a legitimate professional inquiry. I frame it as a routine re-examination for a related claim. Clean legal, no flags on David's end. A pause. Does he know you're looking? He thinks I believed his story. What story? Debt, dangerous people, forced to disappear to protect us. Very convincing performance. He cried. Did you believe it? He was wearing a $180,000 watch, I said. Frank made a sound that in another context would have been a laugh. Keep your phone close. And Robert, keep Leo with you. Don't let him out of your sight. The directness of it landed in my stomach like cold water. You think there's a reason to be worried about Leo specifically, I said. A man who staged his own death and ran an operation for 5 years doesn't end up at your hotel by coincidence, Frank said. And it's worth asking why this exact week. Leo's birthday. Leo turning 11. Another pause. Does David know about any financial arrangements made in Leo's name before he died? The question opened something in my chest that I was not ready for. I don't know, I said. I'd need to look at the estate documents. Pull them if you can, Frank said. Talk to you in the morning. He hung up. I sat at the desk for a long time after that, the notepad in front of me, Los Angeles, glittering outside in the enormous, indifferent way that large cities glitter at 2 in the morning when you are sitting alone with something that will not let you sleep. Then I turned in my chair and looked at Leo, this boy with David's jaw and Samantha's patience and his own particular brand of courage that belonged to no one but himself. I looked at him and felt something move through me that was not quite fear and not quite anger, but had elements of both and was hotter than either. Whatever David had come here for, he was not going to get it. Not while I was breathing. I turned back to the window and sat there until the sky outside went from glittering to gray to the pale, cautious gold of early morning, and I thought about fire and what it leaves behind and how the truth of a thing always survives if you know where to look for it. Before I reveal what Frank found in that fire report, the piece of evidence that shattered everything Robert believed about his own son, I want to pause for just a moment. If this story has touched you, if you feel what Robert is carrying right now, leave truth in the comments. Let me know you're still here with him. What comes next is the moment this entire story has been building toward. You are not ready for it. Note: this story blends fictional elements with emotional storytelling. Certain names and details are not intended to represent anyone specific. If this type of content isn't for you, this is a perfectly fine place to stop. For those staying, take a breath. Here we go. The call came at 7:12. I had not slept. I had watched the Los Angeles sky go from black to gray-purple to pale gold to the hard, committed blue of a Southern California morning, and when the phone buzzed, I picked it up before the vibration finished. "Get somewhere private," Frank said. "Away from the boy." I was already moving. I stepped into the hallway and let the door close behind me and said, "Go." Frank did not preamble. "The fire was not an accident," he said. "Not even close." My hand tightened on the phone. The alarm system was deactivated at 11:47 p.m., 9 minutes before the fire department received the first call. Deactivation was executed through a remote access command from a registered mobile device. The device registered to David Harris's personal security account. Frank's voice had the level precision he used in courtrooms. The carrier's cell tower data places that device approximately 2.3 miles from the house at the time of transmission. Close enough to watch, far enough to establish distance. I pressed my back against the hallway wall and stared at the ceiling. "He was 2 miles away when he shut off the alarms," I said. "The rear exit door was secured with a smart lock at 11:51 p.m. Same device, 6 minutes before the first call came in." The thing that happened in my chest had no name. It was past anger and before grief, and it pressed inward from both sides simultaneously, like a room with walls closing. "He locked the door," I said. "He locked someone inside." "Yes," Frank said. "The original investigation identified the victim through personal effects, a wedding ring, and watch registered to David Harris. The remains were too damaged for standard identification. Case closed ruled accidental. No one pushed for dental or DNA confirmation because there was no reason to." "But you looked anyway." I cross-referenced the Denver missing persons database for the 30-day window around the fire. One report filed 3 days before a man named Marcus Webb, 34 years old, Highlands neighborhood, reported missing by his wife after he failed to come home from a late meeting. Low-priority adult male voluntary absence. Nobody connected it to the fire because nobody was looking for a connection. Marcus Webb worked for David, I said. Chief Financial Officer of Harris Capital Advisors. 6 years. I pulled the audit records from a civil inquiry that was initiated 4 months before the fire and never completed. Preliminary findings showed embezzlement $2.3 million over 18 months. Frank paused. The audit was initiated at Marcus Webb's request. He filed through the firm's compliance officer 8 weeks before he disappeared. He had been documenting the discrepancies for months. The hallway felt very narrow. I had been a fire engineer for 30 years, hundreds of scenes. The thing experience teaches you above everything else is that fire is not random. Fire has a reason, a starting point, a logic. Follow it backward far enough, and you always arrive at a cause. Always. The cause does not disappear because the investigator was tired or the case was closed. David had built his disappearance on the body of a man who had tried to do the right thing. He had killed Marcus Webb, 34 years old wife at home filing a missing persons report, put his own wedding ring on that man's hand, locked the exit from 2 miles away, and walked out with $1.5 million in insurance money and $2.3 million he had already stolen. My son had done that. The man I taught to ride a bicycle and throw a spiral and check a smoke detector battery had planned and executed the murder of another human being. Robert. Frank's voice came carefully. Are you still there? I'm here, I said. Flat. Nothing to do with calm. There's enough for a federal case. Arson resulting in death, California Penal Code 451, potential life sentence. First-degree murder under Penal Code. 187 premeditated victims specifically targeted to facilitate fraud. Add insurance fraud, embezzlement, false identity. Robert, the FBI has jurisdiction on the fraud and identity charges. You need to contact them. 24 hours, I said. Robert, 24 hours. I need to find what he came here for. Something involving Leo. I pressed my free hand against the wall, feeling the paint under my palm. Pull the estate documents from David's death filing. Everything in Leo's name. Trusts, accounts, any financial instruments. Can you do that today? By this afternoon, Frank said. Call me when you have it. I hung up. Down the corridor, a family came out of their room, 2 parents, a small girl in a swimsuit, arguing cheerfully about breakfast versus beach. The girl's voice bounced off the walls with the unstoppable brightness of a child who has not yet learned what the world contains. They moved past me without a glance and disappeared around the corner. I watched them go, then I opened our door. Leo was sitting up in bed, hair everywhere, squinting at me with the expression of someone already assembling information before they were fully awake. You've been in the hall, he said. Phone call. Frank. The fact that he remembered the name from one mention the night before pressed somewhere in the vicinity of my heart. Yes, I said. Is it bad? I looked at this 11-year-old boy who deserved a considerably simpler world than the one he had been handed. It's complicated, I said. But I'm working on it. Are you hungry? He studied my face, reading whatever was written there, and nodded. Starving, he said. Get dressed. We'll get breakfast. And then you and I are going to have a conversation. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, and I went to the window, and outside the Pacific moved in its slow, indifferent way, carrying on regardless. The kids' club counselor. A young woman named Britt, with a ponytail and a whistle around her neck, told me Leo was welcome to join the afternoon session. Boogie boarding and a sandcastle competition with actual judging criteria. Leo looked at me. Go? I said. Where are you going? To see someone who might have answers. He studied my face the way he had been studying it all morning. Then he nodded. Be careful, he said. 11 years old telling me to be careful. Always, I said. The Uber took 32 minutes to Inglewood East on the 10 freeway, and then south through streets that narrowed from commercial to residential by degrees. Dearborn Avenue was a row of small stucco houses in faded California pastels. Number 14 had a door painted brighter blue than the rest, and a window box with yellow marigolds that someone was actively tending. Frank had called Samantha the previous evening. He told her Robert Harris was in Los Angeles, that he knew she was there, that he was not coming to report her whereabouts to anyone. She had been quiet for a long time, Frank said. Then tell him to come. I knocked. The door opened immediately. Samantha Cole was 35 and looked like someone who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and had grown strong from it in ways that did not show on the surface. Thinner than the photograph on my mantel. Shadows under her eyes with the permanent quality of things that do not resolve with sleep. But she was upright. She was steady. Then her face broke not slowly all at once the way things break, when the effort holding them together finally stops. Her chin crumpled. Her eyes filled, she pressed both hands over her mouth and made a sound that was 5 years of something finally finding a way out. Mr. Harris? Her voice shook so hard the words came apart. I'm so sorry. I've wanted to. I didn't know how to. Hey! I put both hands on her shoulders. Her whole body was trembling under my palms. I'm not here to blame you. I need to understand what happened. That's all. She pulled herself together and let me in. The house was small and clean, framed prints, paperbacks arranged by color coffee smell from the kitchen. No photographs anywhere. For a woman who had not seen her son in 5 years, the absence of photographs was either discipline or survival. Probably both. She sat down across from me, the coffee mug between us. He told me they would kill Leo, she said. Flat. All the emotion worn off the surface of it, only the hard fact remaining. Not you, Leo. He was specific. He said if I stayed, if I talked to anyone, if I tried to take Leo and run the people he owed money to, would find Leo first. He knew Leo's school. He knew his schedule. Her hands tightened around the mug. He showed me a photograph of Leo, taken from outside the school fence. She looked at me. I was 29 years old. My husband was showing me photographs of my son taken through a chain-link fence. I believed him. You made the only decision you could with the information you had, I said. I left my 6-year-old son on your doorstep. Her voice cracked through the middle. I got in a car and drove away, and I have not slept a full night since. Not once. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth, hauling herself back together by sheer effort. I sent money every month, she said. $800 when I could, more when I had a good month. Wire transfers, every receipt kept. She stood up, pulled a manila envelope from the kitchen drawer, and put it on the table between us. 47 months. Not one transfer went through. I opened the envelope. The receipts were organized by date, paper-clipped in groups of 6 initiated transfers, confirmation numbers, destination accounts. Not one showed completed delivery. Every transfer had been intercepted and rerouted through intermediate accounts. The fingerprints of a money laundering operation applied to a mother trying to feed her son. David had stolen the money Samantha sent to feed his own son. My hands stayed very still on the papers. I made them. Frank can trace where these ended up, I said. This is significant evidence. Something shifted in her face, not relief yet, but the thing that comes just before it. Then she stood again and came back from the other room carrying something that stopped me cold. A stuffed bear, small, brown, worn soft from years of being held, one ear slightly flattened, a stain on the left paw, grape juice, Leo's 3rd birthday. The cup tipping over, no amount of washing, ever fixing it entirely. Leo's bear. The one I had searched for after Samantha left and assumed was gone. I took it when I left, she said, her voice dropping to almost nothing. It was the only thing I let myself keep. Her hands shook as she held it out. There's something inside, behind the left seam. I put it there the night before I left. I've been waiting 5 years for the right person to find it. I took it from her. I could feel the stiffness of an envelope through the worn fabric. A letter, I asked. Everything I couldn't say out loud. Everything Leo needed to know. She stopped. In case I didn't get the chance to tell him myself. I held the bear in both hands, this grape juice-stained, worn, soft thing that had sat in a drawer in Inglewood for 5 years, carrying a mother's words to a son who thought she had chosen to leave him. My throat closed completely. Did you know, I asked when I could speak again, about Marcus Webb, about what David did? Her face went through something complicated and painful. I knew something was wrong at the firm. I knew David was frightened. Phone calls taken outside locked office. She looked down. I didn't know about Marcus. When it came out a year later, the missing persons case reopening, her voice thinned to almost nothing. I threw up. I sat in a bathroom and shook for an hour. She looked up. Her eyes were dry now, burned clear. He was my husband, she said, and I had no idea who he was. On the drive back, the Uber moved through afternoon traffic on the 10 freeway, and I sat with Leo's bear on my knee and 47 months of wire transfer receipts beside me, and thought about what it meant to live with someone for years and never know the shape of what was underneath. I had raised David. I had taught him everything I knew about being a person, and I had not known either. Leo was the last one out of the kids' club. I watched him through the lobby glass, helping Britt stack the boogie boards, carrying 2 at a time, with the focused effort of someone who wanted to be useful and was making sure it showed. He laughed at something she said, the sound coming through, muffled but unmistakable. I stood there with a stuffed bear under my arm and a manila envelope in my hand, and felt the complicated love of watching a child be genuinely okay in a moment when you know the world is about to ask more of them. He pushed through the door and came toward me, hair damp from the pool-red strap mark on his shoulder. Then he saw the bear. His steps slowed. "Is that?" he started. "Yes," I said. He stopped and stared at it, the grape juice stain on the left paw, the flattened ear, the worn soft fabric. His chin did the thing it did when he was fighting not to cry. "Where did you get that?" His voice came out younger than usual, the 6-year-old he used to be. "I'll explain upstairs," I said. We ordered burgers and fries and ate without much talking. Leo watching the bear on the nightstand, the way you watch something you are not sure is real. When the plates were pushed aside and the last daylight was fading over the ocean, I picked up the bear and sat down on the edge of his bed. "I went to see your mother today," I said. Leo went completely still. "She's here." Barely a whisper. "In L.A., Inglewood, 30 minutes from here." I held the bear in both hands, feeling the envelope through the fabric. "She's been moving carefully for years, staying quiet, because she was frightened." I paused. "She's still frightened, but she wanted me to come." Leo's knuckles went pale where he gripped the bedsheet. "Why did she leave?" The question came out raw. The real one, the one underneath all the others he had never quite asked. Not the version I was told. The real reason. Your father threatened your life, I said. The words landed and stayed. His eyes filled. His grip on the sheet tightened until the fabric bunched between his fingers. He told her. I said, keeping my voice steady, because one of us had to, that people he owed money to would hurt you if she stayed. He showed her a photograph of you at school, taken through the fence. He told her they knew your schedule. I looked at him. She believed him. She made the only choice she thought would keep you alive. She left to protect me. His voice shattered on the last word, not breaking cleanly, but coming apart in pieces, the way things come apart when pressure has been building for 5 years and finally finds a release point. She left because she was trying to protect me. Yes, I said. He pressed both hands over his face and his shoulders shook, and the sounds he made were the sounds of a child who has been carrying something much too heavy and has finally been told he can put it down. I moved beside him, and he turned into me, the way he had not done since he was very small, both arms around my ribs, face pressed into my chest, holding on. I held on back. When his breathing steadied and the grip on my ribs loosened from desperate to simply present, I reached for the bear. There's something inside, I said. Your mother put it there the night before she left. A letter. For you. I held it out. Do you want to open it? Or do you want me to read it? He pulled back, face-wet eyes, swollen expression, stripped of every layer of composure he had built over 5 years. You read it, he said. Please. I worked the seam open carefully. Inside was a standard white envelope, slightly yellowed. On the front, in Samantha's handwriting, for Leo. When he's ready, I opened it and began. Leo, my sweet boy. If you are reading this, someone found the bear. I hope it was your grandfather, because he is the person I trust most in the world to take care of you when I cannot. Leo made a sound beside me, small and broken and involuntary. I did not leave because I wanted to. I left because your father told me that if I stayed, people he was involved with would hurt you. I believed him, and I decided that a world where you were alive and angry at me was better than any other option I had. You were the reason. You were always the reason. I kept my voice steady. Line by line. I have been sending money every month. I work at a dry cleaner. I work at a restaurant on weekends. I send everything I can. Leo's breath hitched. I think about you every single morning. Before I am fully awake, before I remember where I am, I think about you. I think about your real laugh, not the polite one, the one that came from your stomach. I think about the grape juice on the bear's paw, and how upset you were, and how we both ended up laughing anyway. I am trying to get back to you. I don't know how yet, but I am trying. I love you, Leo. Every single day, including the ones where I was not there. All my love, always, Mom. I folded the letter and held it. Leo was not crying anymore. He sat straight, hands flat on his thighs, face turned toward the window, where the last light was dying over the water. Jaw set. Eyes dry, not from holding back, but from reaching somewhere past tears. Somewhere quieter. She tried to send money, he said. Every month, I said. For almost 4 years. Your father intercepted it. Leo turned and looked at me, his eyes the clearest they had been since we landed. He took the money she was sending to feed me. Yes. He looked back at the window. Okay, he said. One word. Flat and certain, and not up for discussion. What do we do next? I looked at this boy who had just had 5 years of grief rewritten in an hour, and was already asking what came next. "Tonight, you sleep," I said. "Tomorrow, we do the next thing." He nodded, lay down facing the window, and held the bear against his chest. "Grandpa," he said quietly, "she said she was trying to get back to me." "I know." "Can she?" I looked at the bear in his arms, grape juice-stained, flattened, ear-worn soft fabric, and thought about a woman in Inglewood with marigolds in a window box and 47 receipts in a kitchen drawer. "Yes," I said. "I think she can." He closed his eyes. I sat in the dark and listened to him breathe, and thought about tomorrow, and what it was going to require, and whether I was ready. I was not ready, but I was going to do it anyway. Frank called at 8:47. I was at the window with my second coffee, watching the Santa Monica Pier come alive in the early light Ferris wheel, turning joggers on the path above the beach, the Pacific doing what it always did. Leo was still asleep. After everything the night before had asked of him, I had decided he could have the morning. I stepped into the hallway. "Talk to me," I said. "I pulled the estate filing," Frank said, with the careful pace of a man handing someone something heavy and wanting to make sure they had their footing. David filed a comprehensive estate plan 8 months before the fire. Most of it was standard, but there was one instrument that stood out. "Leo," I said, "a revocable living trust in Leo's name. $3 million drawn from personal investment accounts." I checked them against the embezzlement records from the Harris Capital audit. He paused. "The money is clean, Robert. Legitimate investment income." He kept it completely separate from what he stole. He put $3 million clean in Leo's name. I pressed my back against the hallway wall and looked at the ceiling. David had stolen from his clients, murdered a man, faked his death, abandoned his son, and somewhere inside all of that, he had put $3 million clean in Leo's name. I did not know what to do with that. I filed it under things to think about later and kept listening. "Standard provision is principal accessible at 25, Frank said. "But there's a secondary clause, unusual but legal. The legal guardian can access the trust early for qualifying expenses. Tuition documented medical costs or a lump sum disbursement authorized by a co-trustee, demonstrating financial hardship." He paused. "David named himself co-trustee." "Which he can't exercise," I said. "He's legally dead." "Correct. But the document includes a resurrection clause if the named co-trustee is subsequently determined to be living trustee authority reinstates upon verification of identity." His voice dropped. "Robert David's offshore accounts are currently under partial FBI freeze as part of the money laundering investigation. A RICO preliminary injunction, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. That freeze becomes a permanent seizure order within 60 to 90 days. Based on the filing dates, he's at 40 days. The numbers arranged themselves. He has 20 to 50 days before that money is gone permanently, I said. And he needs the trust disbursement before the seizure finalizes. To get it, he has to establish his living identity, reinstate his co-trustee authority, and get court authorization all within that window. Frank let that settle. He cannot move that money without you. You're the primary trustee. Any disbursement requires your authorization alongside his. That was the piece I had been missing. That was why he had cried at the bar. That was why he had called me Dad on the sand after I pulled him out of the water. Not because he was sorry, because he needed something only I could give him. And everything, the tears, the kneeling, the story about dangerous people was the opening move of a negotiation he had been planning for months. My hand tightened on the phone until my knuckles went white. "Contact the FBI," I said. "Whoever has jurisdiction on the Harris Capital fraud investigation. Tell them where David is and what he's planning. Can you do that today?" Within the hour, Frank said. But once I make that call, things move fast. You'll have a day, maybe less, before they act. Make the call. I stopped. And Frank, thank you for all of it. He was quiet a moment. You've been alone in this for 5 years. It's about time somebody helped. A pause. Watch Leo today. He hung up. I stood in the hallway letting the information settle into its full weight. Then the elevator opened. Victoria Marsh stepped out, dark blazer phone in hand, the forward-moving efficiency of someone with a schedule and the intention to keep it. She walked toward me the way she moved through every space like it already belonged to her. She was 6 feet away when she looked up. Her eyes found mine. Something happened in them, not alarm, not recognition exactly, but the rapid recalibration of a highly intelligent person who has just encountered a variable they had not accounted for. 2 seconds, maybe less. Then her expression went neutral, and she walked past me without speaking. I turned and watched her go. She did not look back. But at the end of the corridor, just before she turned the corner, she slowed by half a step. Just half a step. 30 years of reading people in dangerous situations had taught me the difference between someone uncertain about where they were going and someone thinking hard about what they had just seen. She was thinking, and whatever she decided in the next few hours was going to matter. I went back into the room. Leo was sitting up in bed, holding the bear against his chest, watching me with clear, rested eyes, the eyes of someone who had cried everything out and woken up on the other side. "What's happening today?" he asked. I sat down on the edge of my bed and looked at him and decided that today was the day he needed to know everything. Then one more thing landed in my mind, something I had been too shaken to ask Frank until now. I picked up my phone and sent him a single text. How did David know which hotel we'd be in? Frank's reply came back in under 3 minutes. He didn't guess. Reeves pulled David's digital surveillance records this morning. His people had access to your email account for at least 6 weeks. They saw the hotel confirmation the night you booked it. He checked in the day before you arrived. I stared at the screen. He had not ended up next door by coincidence. He had put himself there deliberately, reading my emails, watching us come to him. Every moment since we landed, the voice through the wall, the beach, the bar had happened exactly where he intended it to happen. The only thing he had not planned for was Leo recognizing him on the plane before they even landed. I set the phone down. "A lot," I said. "Come here. Let me tell you." I told Leo everything, not a version of it. Not a careful edited summary designed to protect him from the parts that were sharpest. Everything. The fire, Marcus Webb. The alarm system deactivated from David's phone. The locked door, the insurance money. The $3 million in the trust. The resurrection clause, the FBI. Freeze the reason David was in Los Angeles. I sat on the edge of his bed, and I laid it out, piece by piece, the way you lay out a map, when someone needs to understand the full terrain before they take a step, and Leo sat cross-legged on the blanket, with the bear in his lap, and listened without interrupting. When I finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then Leo said, "He killed someone." "Yes," I said. "And he let us think he was dead so he could take the money." "Yes. And now he wants to take my money." "That's what the evidence indicates." Leo looked down at the bear in his lap. He ran his thumb along the flattened ear back and forth, the way he did when he was processing something that required his hands to be moving. His jaw was tight. His eyes were dry. The boy who had cried everything out the night before was gone, and what was sitting across from me now was something more composed and more resolved, something that had been built in the space that grief left behind when it finally emptied out. "Okay," he said. The same word he had used the night before, but harder now. Flatter. With more weight behind it. "What do we do?" We stay visible, I said. We go about our day normally. We do not give David any reason to think we are anything other than a grandfather and his grandson on a birthday vacation. And tonight, when you are asleep, I am going to make sure that the people who need to know where David is know where David is. Leo nodded. And me? What do I do? I reached into my pocket and held out the watch, a Garmin Instinct practical and durable, the kind built for people who spent time outdoors, in conditions where a device needed to function reliably. I had bought it for Leo in March for a school camping trip, and he had worn it every day since. I pressed the side button until the emergency SOS menu appeared on the small screen. You keep this on your wrist, I said. And if anything happens, anything at all, anything that feels wrong, anyone tries to take you anywhere, you press this button and you hold it for 3 seconds. It sends a GPS signal to my phone and to emergency services simultaneously. You understand? Leo looked at the watch, then at me. You think he might try to take me? It was not a question. I think a man who has done what David has done is capable of things we should prepare for, I said. I would rather have this conversation and not need it than need it and not have had it. He took the watch from my hand and fastened it around his wrist with the focused deliberateness of someone accepting a responsibility. Okay, he said. I've got it. We went to the pool at 11. The morning had burned off into a full California noon, the kind of bright that makes everything look slightly overexposed, the sun pressing down on the water, and the deck chairs, and the handful of guests arranged around the pool with the democratic intensity it applies to everything. Leo got into the water immediately, moving from the shallow end to the deep with the methodical back and forth of someone who needed to be in motion. I settled into a chair with a newspaper I was not reading and watched 2 things simultaneously, Leo in the pool and the man sitting across the deck. He had been there when we arrived. He was perhaps 45, heavy-set, wearing a baseball cap pulled low and a t-shirt with a logo I did not recognize. He had a drink on the table beside him that he had not touched in 20 minutes. He was looking at his phone, but his phone had not changed screens in the time I had been watching, and his eyes moved in a pattern that had nothing to do with reading a regular sweep pool, to entrance to deck pool to entrance to deck, with the mechanical rhythm of someone performing a task rather than spending an afternoon. Surveillance. Not professional grade. A professional would have varied the pattern, would have given the drink more attention, would have found a better reason to be stationary for 40 minutes. But competent enough. David knew I had been making calls. I kept my face in the newspaper, and my body language relaxed, and thought about the speed at which things were now moving. Frank had contacted the FBI. That call had been made before 9 this morning. The wheels were in motion. What I did not know was how much David knew and how quickly he would decide to act on whatever his surveillance had told him. The answer came through the building's walls. Not literally, I could not hear what was happening in the suite above us, but I could read it in what happened to Victoria Marsh 40 minutes later. I saw her come through the door from the lobby onto the pool deck. She was moving faster than her usual pace, not running, but close to it, the walk of someone who has just received information that has changed the shape of their immediate future. She crossed the deck without looking at anyone, went through the far door toward the elevators, and disappeared. 3 minutes later, she came back. She stood at the edge of the pool deck and looked out at the water, and her hands at her sides were absolutely still in the specific way that hands go still when a person is using every available resource to keep their exterior surface from reflecting their interior state. She was looking at Leo in the pool. I watched her watch him, and I watched the moment when something in her face changed, subtle, almost invisible, the kind of shift that happens below the threshold of deliberate expression in the part of a face that tells the truth before the rest of it has decided to. She looked at Leo and something moved through her eyes that was not calculation and not professional assessment, but something older and less manageable than either of those things. She took out her phone. She held it in both hands for a long moment, looking at the screen without dialing. Then she put it back in her pocket and walked back inside. I did not know yet what she had decided, but I knew she had decided something. That afternoon, while Leo was drying off and eating a sandwich from the pool bar and arguing cheerfully with a kid his age about whether the Dodgers or the Padres had the better bullpen this season, I stepped away and called Frank. "Did you reach the FBI?" I asked. "Special Agent Diana Reeves, FBI, Los Angeles Field Office," Frank said. "She took the call. She's familiar with the Harris Capital case. Her unit has been working the money laundering angle for about 8 months. When I gave her David's location and the trust fund situation, she got very quiet, in a way that meant she was already thinking about next steps." "How long before they move?" "She said she needed to verify and coordinate," Frank said. "My read is 24 hours, possibly less. She asked me to tell you not to do anything that would alert David before they're in position." "Understood," I said. "Robert." Frank's voice had the careful quality it got when he was about to say something he had been holding. "Reeves mentioned something else. The Harris Capital investigation has a secondary target they've been working alongside David. A woman named Victoria Marsh, listed as his chief operating officer under the shell company he's been running. They have substantial evidence against her, enough for charges, but they've been hoping she'd flip before they moved." I thought about Victoria standing at the edge of the pool deck, with her phone in both hands, looking at a boy in the water. "She might be ready to flip," I said. "That was Reeves's read too," Frank said. "If she reaches out to them before they move, she gets a significantly better deal than if she waits." I hung up and stood outside the pool bar and looked through the glass at Leo, who was now gesturing broadly while making what appeared to be a statistical argument about earned run averages to a kid who was approximately as interested as a person can be while still technically being present. The small, ordinary brightness of it hit me somewhere I had not expected. I went back in and sat down, and Leo glanced over and said, without breaking his argument, "Grandpa, tell this kid about the Dodgers bullpen." And I said I didn't follow baseball closely enough to have an opinion, which was a lie. And Leo said, "He absolutely does. He watches the games on his phone at 10 o'clock at night." Which was true, and the other kid laughed. And for 45 minutes I sat in a pool bar in Santa Monica and argued about baseball and let myself pretend for just that long that the afternoon was exactly what it looked like. Then I went back to the room, and I checked the deadbolt, and I called up the emergency SOS function on my own phone and made sure it was linked to Leo's watch, and I sat down and thought carefully about tomorrow. The man across the pool deck had left at 3 o'clock, but I knew he had not gone far, and I knew with the same bone-deep certainty that had kept me alive in 30 years of walking into burning buildings that tonight was the last quiet night we were going to have. I did not sleep again. That was becoming a pattern, the nights in Los Angeles, taking something from me that the days did not give back. I lay on my back in the dark and listened to Leo breathe and ran through contingencies the way I had run through exit strategies in burning buildings, mapping the possibilities, identifying the variables I could control and the ones I could not, and making my peace with the ratio. By 5 in the morning, I had a plan. By 6, I had a backup plan. By 6:45, when the sky outside had committed to full daylight, and Leo stirred and rolled over and blinked at me from across the room, with the slow, assembling expression of someone coming back from very far away, I had decided that today was the day I told him everything he needed to know to protect himself. Not the facts, he already had those. The operational facts. The ones that mattered if something went wrong. Come here, I said. Before you do anything else, sit down. Leo sat up and pushed his hair out of his face and looked at me with eyes that were alert, in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. He had been sleeping lightly. I had heard it in the shallowness of his breathing through the night, not the total surrender of the night before, but the monitored rest of someone who had decided to stay partially available. He was 11 years old, and he was sleeping like a soldier. I pulled out my phone and opened the audio file Frank had sent the previous afternoon, a 40-second recording. The audio quality slightly compressed from the digital intercept, but clear enough. I turned the volume up and set the phone on the bed between us. David's voice filled the small space between us. The old man has been making calls. I want the boy secured before Reeves's people get their paperwork in order. You move tomorrow morning, early, when the grandfather is occupied. The pier or the beach somewhere with enough foot traffic that it reads as a family situation if anyone looks. You bring him to the boat, and you keep him there until I say otherwise. A pause. Then quieter, with the precise and terrible flatness of a man stating a fact, rather than making a threat. Don't hurt him. He's worth more intact. I stopped the recording. Leo was looking at the phone. His face had gone the color of the wall behind him. His hands resting on his knees had curled into fists without him seeming to notice. He called me worth more intact, Leo said. His voice was very quiet. Yes, I said. Like I'm a thing. Yes. Leo's jaw tightened until I could see the muscle working in his cheek. He breathed out slowly through his nose, a long, controlled breath that I recognized I had taught him that years ago when he was anxious before soccer games. In through the nose, out through the nose, long and slow. It works whether you are nervous about a penalty kick or processing the fact that your biological father has just referred to you as an asset. Okay, he said. The word had a different quality now, not the careful okay of someone accepting difficult information, not the resolute okay of someone preparing for a hard conversation, but the stripped-down operational okay of someone who has moved past the emotional register entirely and into something more functional. What do I need to know? I told him. The watch SOS button 3-second hold GPS to my phone and to 911 simultaneously. I had already confirmed with Agent Reeves that the emergency services link was active and that her team was flagged to respond to any SOS from that device's GPS coordinates. The moment that button was pressed, the FBI had authorization to move. If anyone approached him, anyone at all, anyone he did not know, anyone who asked him to go somewhere, he was to make noise. Immediately. Not to run first, not to argue, not to try to understand the situation. Noise first, movement second, SOS third. If he could not make noise, SOS immediately. If the SOS did not work, he was to say my name loudly, repeatedly to anyone within earshot. Leo listened to all of it, with the focused attention of someone memorizing a procedure. And if it's him, he asked. If it's David who comes. I looked at my grandson. Then you remember what you heard on that recording, I said. And you trust what you know, not what he tells you in the moment, what you already know. Leo nodded once slowly, the nod of someone locking something into place. I called Agent Reeves at 7:15 from the bathroom with the shower running. She picked up on the first ring. Harris, she said. Not a question. My grandson is going to the beach this morning, I said, keeping my voice low and even under the sound of the water. I need to know your timeline. We're in position as of an hour ago, she said. Reeves had the voice of someone who had been awake longer than I had, and was running on professionalism and caffeine in roughly equal measure. 2 units at the pier, 1 at the beach access, 1 at the hotel perimeter. We've had eyes on the boat at San Pedro since last night. It's a 42-foot Beneteau registered to a shell company that traces back to Marsh's operation. David Harris and 2 associates were observed boarding at 11 p.m. He's already on the boat, I said. He slept there, Reeves said, which tells us he's planning to move fast and move water. We need him to make the move before we can take him. We need the kidnapping attempt on record, not just the financial charges. If he takes the boy to the boat, we have federal kidnapping interstate transport of a minor the works. It becomes an airtight case. A pause. Mr. Harris, I need you to let this play out. I know what I'm asking. My hand tightened on the phone. You're asking me to use my grandson as bait, I said. I'm asking you to trust that we will not let anything happen to him, she said. The moment that SOS fires, we move. We have been building this case for 8 months. I will not let it fall apart because we moved too early. I stood in the bathroom with the shower running and the steam building and the phone pressed against my ear and thought about every version of this I had run through in the dark. He doesn't leave my sight until the last possible moment, I said. Agreed, Reeves said. And the moment that SOS fires, you move. Not when it's convenient. The moment it fires. The moment it fires, she said. I turned off the shower and went back into the room. Leo was dressed sitting on the edge of the bed, the bear set carefully on the nightstand. He looked up when I came in. We're going to the beach, I said. He stood up without hesitation. We had been on the sand for 22 minutes when it happened. I had positioned myself on the chair closest to the waterline newspaper, open, watching Leo over the top of it. He was at the water's edge, letting the waves come in around his ankles, looking out at the horizon, with the particular stillness of someone who has accepted that a thing is coming and is choosing to stand upright while they wait. The 2 men came from the north end of the beach. They moved with the practiced casual pace of people trying not to look like what they were, not running, not aggressive, just 2 men in board shorts and t-shirts walking across a beach on a summer morning. One slightly ahead, one slightly behind, the positioning of people who had done this before and knew how to use a second person to close an angle. Leo saw them at the same moment I did. He looked back at me. I gave the smallest nod. He turned back to the ocean. The first man reached him and said something low. I was 30 feet away, and the surf covered the words and put his hand on Leo's shoulder. The second man moved to Leo's other side. Leo did not run. He did not shout. He pressed the SOS button on his watch and held it for 3 seconds. Then the first man lifted him off his feet, and Leo opened his mouth and screamed my name at the top of his lungs, and I was already running. I was 60 years old, with bad knees on a sand beach, and I ran anyway. I reached the first man in 8 seconds and grabbed his arm and pulled, and he spun and shoved me back hard enough that I went down on one knee in the wet sand, and by the time I was up, they were 40 feet away and moving fast toward the parking access. I pulled out my phone. Uber. Destination port of Los Angeles, San Pedro. The app showed a driver 2 minutes away. I called Frank as I ran toward the parking lot. They have Leo. They're heading to the port. I'm behind them. Reeves already has the SOS, Frank said. She's moving. The Uber pulled up as I reached the street. I got in before it stopped moving. Port of Los Angeles, I said. San Pedro, as fast as you can. The driver looked at me in the mirror sand, on my knees phone in one hand, the expression of a man who was holding himself together by a very thin thread, and he nodded once and pulled into traffic without a word. The drive was 26 minutes. I counted every one of them. The port hit me like a wall diesel and salt water, and the deep mechanical groan of container equipment that never stopped moving. The Uber pulled up at the San Pedro gate, and I was out before it stopped moving through the entrance on legs that had nothing left in them except the will to keep going. Agent Reeves was already there. She was standing at the base of the main dock with 4 agents fanned out behind her, and when she saw me, she pointed left without speaking, down the secondary pier, toward a cluster of leisure craft moored at the far end. I ran. The Beneteau was 40 feet from the dock exit engine running one line already cast off. David was on the bow with Leo in front of him, one arm around the boy's chest, his body angled toward the water. He had not seen me yet. His eyes were on the agents coming up the dock, and his face was doing the thing it did when he was calculating that particular stillness that looked like calm but was actually the opposite. I pushed past the last agent and stopped at the edge of the dock. "David," I said. He turned. Something happened in his face when he saw me, not surprise, not guilt, but something cracked and unresolved that I did not have a name for and did not have time to examine. Leo's eyes found mine over David's arm, and I watched my grandson take a breath and pull his shoulders back and stand up straighter, and the courage of that small movement hit me somewhere I was not prepared for. David's voice came out smooth and practiced, the voice he had used in the bar 3 nights ago, the performance voice. "Leo." He tightened his arm slightly, his tone shifting to something softer, more persuasive. "Look at me. Look at your dad. Your grandfather called the police on me. He's been working against us this whole time. You want to come with me, a new country, a real life, money, a future, or you want to go back to that house in Denver with him and have nothing?" He pressed his face close to Leo's ear. "Choose, son. Right now. Choose your father." Leo stood very still. 1 second. 2. 3. Then he reached up and grabbed David's arm with both hands and pulled it off his chest with everything he had, and he stepped forward and away, and he turned around and looked David in the face. "You called me worth more intact," Leo said. His voice did not shake. "I heard the recording. I know what you did to Marcus Webb. I know about the money. I know all of it." He took one more step toward the dock. "You're not my dad. You're someone who used to be." He walked off the boat. I dropped to my knees when he reached me, and he hit my arms at full speed, and I held on with everything I had left, and he pressed his face into my shoulder, and his whole body shook, not from fear, I realized, but from the adrenaline of having done something that had cost him something real. "You did it," I said into the top of his head. "You did it, Leo." "I know," he said, muffled against my shoulder. "I know." Behind us, Agent Reeves's phone rang. She looked at the screen and something shifted in her expression. "That's Marsh," she said to the agent beside her. "She's calling in." David heard it. I saw the exact moment he understood what it meant, the color leaving his face, the calculation behind his eyes, collapsing into something that had no more moves left in it. He looked at me over Leo's head, and for just that moment before the agents moved in, I saw what was underneath all of it. Not the man who had faked his death or planned a murder or tried to take his son's money. Just a person who had made choices, one after another, each one closing a door until there were no doors left. I did not feel what I expected to feel. I felt tired. The agents moved past us onto the boat. David did not resist. The handcuffs went on with a sound that was very small against the noise of the port. The engines, the water, the container cranes in the distance. And they walked him down the dock in the bright San Pedro morning, and I watched him go. And then I stopped watching. Leo pulled back and looked up at me. "Is it over?" he asked. I looked at my grandson, a sandy, red-eyed jaw still set from what he had just done, and I thought about what over meant, and whether it was the right word, and decided that right now it was close enough. "The hard part is," I said. He nodded. We sat down together on the dock, our feet hanging over the edge, the water moving below us in long, slow swells, and we sat there without moving for a while, and the port went on around us, and the sun came fully over the buildings to the east, and neither of us said anything for a long time because neither of us needed to. The courthouse on Spring Street in downtown Los Angeles had the particular gravity of a building that had absorbed a great deal of human consequence over a long time. High ceilings, marble floors, the sound of footsteps arriving from every direction and going nowhere fast. I had been inside courthouses before testimony in arson cases, depositions for insurance disputes, but I had never sat in one waiting for a verdict that had my family's name on every page. Leo sat beside me on the bench outside the courtroom. Samantha sat 2 seats down, close enough that I could hear her breathing, but far enough that the distance between them was still being negotiated slowly, in the careful way that damaged things are sometimes repaired, not all at once, but incrementally, one honest conversation at a time. They had been talking for 2 months. It was going the way these things go when both people are telling the truth. Carol Whitman had flown in from Denver at her own expense. She had sat in that witness box for 40 minutes and told the court about 5 years of watching Robert Harris raise a boy who was not biologically his, the soccer games, and the school pickups, and the lights on at 2 in the morning. When Leo had nightmares, the sold watch, and the extra shifts, and the way Robert had never once in 5 years made Leo feel like anything other than the most important thing in his world. When she stepped down from the stand, she caught my eye and gave me the small, firm nod of someone who had done what they came to do and was satisfied with it. Judge Patricia Lowe was 62 years old and had the unhurried precision of someone who had long since stopped being impressed by anything and had decided that accuracy was more useful than speed. She read the verdicts without inflection and without pause. David Harris. Guilty on all counts. First-degree murder. Arson resulting in death. Money laundering. Kidnapping of a minor. The sentence: life without the possibility of parole to be served at a federal correctional facility. He sat at the defense table and did not turn around. I watched the back of his head and felt nothing simple, nothing that resolved cleanly into a single emotion. What I felt was the specific exhaustion of a thing that has been fought for a long time finally being finished, and the strange lightness that comes with it. And underneath both of those things, something older and quieter that I did not examine too closely because it was not something the courtroom was the right place for. The trust fund was addressed in a separate proceeding the same afternoon. Judge Lowe reviewed the documentation. Frank had compiled the wire transfer receipts. The account traces the evidence of systematic interception and ordered the full restitution of Samantha's contributions from David's seized assets. $3 million remained in Leo's trust, untouched, its legitimacy confirmed to be held until his majority. Samantha was awarded sole legal and physical custody of Leo. Robert remained as co-guardian by Samantha's own request, a formal arrangement she asked the court to recognize, acknowledging the 5 years he had raised her son when she could not. When the gavel came down for the last time, Leo reached over and took my hand. He did not say anything. He just held on and I held back. And beside us, Samantha pressed both hands over her mouth, and her shoulders shook with something that was not grief. Carol leaned over from the row behind us and put her hand briefly on my shoulder. "Okay," she asked. I thought about the photograph on the mantel in Denver, the empty urn, the chair at the kitchen table. "Getting there," I said. She patted my shoulder once and sat back. Outside the courthouse, the Los Angeles afternoon was doing what it always did, bright and enormous and indifferent, the sun pressing down on Spring Street with the same democratic intensity it applied to everything. Leo stood on the courthouse steps and tilted his face up toward it, eyes closed, and breathed. Samantha stood beside him. She looked at me over the top of his head, and her eyes were wet, and she mouthed 2 words that did not need a voice. "Thank you." I nodded. Then Leo opened his eyes and looked at both of us and said, Can we get food? I've been sitting on a wooden bench for 4 hours and I'm starving. And Samantha laughed, surprised out of herself, genuine and full, and I felt something loosen in my chest that had been wound tight for 5 years. We went and got food. We went to the beach one last time. It was Leo's idea. After lunch, when the afternoon was still wide open, and the flight back to Denver was not until the following morning, he said he wanted to go back to Santa Monica, not to the pool, not to the pier, just to the beach, just the water. Samantha came with us. Nobody planned it that way. It simply happened the way things sometimes do when the structure holding people apart has finally been removed, and they find that the distance closes on its own. We spread 2 towels on the sand, and Leo went straight to the water and stood there at the edge of it, letting the Pacific come in around his ankles, the way he had on the first morning, except that the boy standing there now was not the same boy who had arrived 5 days ago. Something had changed in his posture. Some weight redistributed, some calculation altered. He stood straighter. He breathed differently. He looked at the horizon the way people look at things they are no longer afraid of. Samantha sat on the towel beside me. For a while we did not speak, and the not speaking was comfortable in the way that the not speaking between people is comfortable when they have already said the important things, and what remains between them is simply the fact of each other. Then she said quietly, "The DNA results came back this morning, before the sentencing." "I know," I said. "Reeves told me." "David isn't your son," she said, "biologically." "No," I said. "He isn't." She looked at me. "How long have you known?" I suspected when Frank suggested the test. I watched Leo bend down and pick something up from the sand, a shell from the look of it, turning it over in his hands. I agreed to it anyway. Whatever the answer was, it needed to be known. Samantha was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry," she said, "for what she kept from you." "She kept it because she was frightened," I said. "People do things when they're frightened that they spend the rest of their lives carrying. I know something about that." Leo came back up the sand toward us, holding the shell out to me, white, slightly iridescent, the size of a quarter. "Found this," he said, "for your collection." "I don't have a collection," I said. "You do now," he said, and dropped it into my palm and sat down cross-legged in the sand in front of us. He looked at me for a moment. Then he said carefully, the way he said things when he had been thinking about them for a while, "The DNA thing, about you and David." "Yes," I said. "Does it change anything?" he asked. "For you, about me?" The question landed in the center of my chest and stayed there. I looked at this boy, 11 years old, shell finder soccer player, keeper of secrets, too large for his age, the person who had walked off a boat in San Pedro with his chin up and his voice steady, and told his biological father that he was someone who used to be. I looked at him and I thought about 30 years of doing a job that required you to walk toward things that everyone else was walking away from. And I thought about how you learn in that work. That the thing that makes a man is not what he is made of, but what he does with what he has. "No," I said. "It doesn't change anything." Leo nodded. He seemed satisfied with that, not relieved exactly, because I did not think he had genuinely doubted it, but satisfied the way you are satisfied when something you already believed is confirmed by someone who would know. He leaned back on his hands and looked out at the water. "Ashes and truth," he said suddenly. Samantha and I both looked at him. "That's what this whole thing was," he said. "Like everything burned down. Dad. The life we thought we had. What I thought about Mom." He glanced at Samantha briefly, something soft and careful in the look. And then the truth came out of it. "Like things do after a fire, Grandpa. You always said that. You said the truth of a thing survives the fire if you know where to look." I had said that 30 years ago to a class of young engineers who did not yet know what fire could take and what it left behind. I had not known then that I was also describing my own life. Yeah, I said. That's exactly what it was. Leo stood up, brushed the sand off his shorts, and held out both hands, one toward me, one toward Samantha. Come on, he said. Walk with me. Samantha looked at me. I looked at her. We both took his hands. The three of us walked down to the water and let it come in around our feet, cold and indifferent and enormous. The Pacific doing what it had always done, and would keep doing long after all of this was memory. Leo walked between us, holding on, and the sun dropped lower over the water and turned everything it touched the color of something beginning rather than ending. I held the shell in my free hand. It was small and ordinary, and slightly iridescent, and it had survived everything the ocean had thrown at it and come out whole, and Leo had thought it was worth keeping. I thought so too. I spent 60 years believing that blood made a family. I was wrong. David had my blood, and he chose to burn everything down. Leo had none of my blood, and he chose to hold on. Looking back at this family story, I wish I had asked harder questions earlier about David, about the fire, about the silence that had no good explanation. Don't make my mistake. When something feels wrong, trust that feeling. Investigate. The truth survives everything, even fire. I believe God puts certain children in certain people's lives for a reason. Leo was placed in mine not by blood, but by something greater than that. I do not question it anymore. I am only grateful. If this grandpa story reached your heart today, you are not alone. Across every city from Los Angeles to New York, there are grandfathers raising grandchildren, fighting quiet battles nobody sees. This is their family story, too. This is every grandpa's story that never makes the headlines. If you felt something watching this, leave a comment below. Tell me where you are watching from. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button so you never miss the next story. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. The stories on this channel contain fictional elements created for educational and entertainment purposes. If this type of content is not for you, we respect that completely. Please feel free to explore other content that better suits you. We will be here whenever you are ready.